Young children acts have been a part of the music industry for so many years, from Sammy Davis Jr. to the Jackson 5 to the youngsters. What's going on, everybody? My name is Maximus Keys. Welcome to this brand new episode of Genre Evolution. And today on this episode, I'm going to be talking to you guys the history between children and the music industry. But before we get into the video, ladies and gentlemen, I want everybody to subscribe and please click the link in the description below and check out my group KOM's brand new music video playing our own rendition of Smells Like Teen Spirit. And please do not forget or hesitate to leave a like on the video. And now, back to our regular programming. One of the first kid acts to ever find themselves in the music industry is a young group by the name of Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. In the beginning, it wasn't very common to find so many different young acts with so many great talents, especially in the music industry, but Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers were one of the first kid acts to ever lead that example, especially with their biggest hits such as Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Why do fools fall in love? Why do fools fall in love? And love is the way to break a day. Why do they fall in love? And Juvenile Delinquents. Do the thing that's right. You'll do nothing wrong. Life will be so nice. Be in paradise. Because of them being a leading example moving on through the 20th century, there was a young man who took on that example to be a great musician by the name of Stevie Wonder. Even though Stevie Wonder was blind, he had a niche for instruments and so many different things in music, and he was considered a child prodigy. At the age of 11, he was known as Little Stevie Wonder and signed his first record deal with Motown Records. Now, at the time, Stevie Wonder was one of the few child acts that was actually seen as child prodigies and that was put up to the forefront in the music industry, especially during the early 60s. But then later on, he would give a lot of inspirations to a lot of younger kids who wanted to be a part of the music industry just like him. Besides, young kids would sell a lot of records because of them being so little but having so much talent. Stevie Wonder later led the example during that time. Then more acts started to sprout out of the woodwork, such as the Jackson 5, the Silvers, the Osmonds, and the DeFranco family, and plenty more. Now, like I've explained before, young acts of the 1970s and just young acts in general were young and were doing music and was selling music even faster more than adults because of the fact that they were young child prodigies. But trust me, grown-ups and producers weren't the only ones who were buying these records. Young teen heart-throbbing girls did as well. Magazines, cereals, even cardboard paper cutouts were involved too. Oh yeah, and the girls' fantasy as well. Merchandise at the time were probably one of the biggest things that were helping sell records, but if they couldn't afford actual full-length LPs, they would try and get 45s. But also at the time, the family dynamic when it came to the music industry was pretty big as well. Like I've mentioned before, the Jackson 5, the Silvers, the works. Now, personality-wise is another way that they sold records as well. And every group dynamic, depending on how many people were in the group, you had the goofy one, the cute one, the one with the most sex appeal, the quiet one, and the smartest one. And every girl that was a fan got to pick their crush, which goes back to the original statement that I mentioned about selling a fantasy, which later started to redevelop over the years in the 1980s. Kid groups who were taking over this dynamic at this point was The Boys, New Edition, and New Kids on the Block. These similar elements will still go throughout the 80s, it's just that nowadays with this era of music videos, the fantasies were starting to come to life. Songs and videos like Candy Girl by New Edition, Please Don't Go Girl by New Kids on the Block, and Dial My Heart by The Boys. Throughout the 80s, a lot of things became more kid-friendly in the music industry, especially if you were young.
A lot of record companies were making a lot of money and getting their money's worth by the kids looking cute for a lot of little girls. Because in the entertainment industry, if you can hit the kids market, you will always make money, especially during that time when parents had little kids that wanted them to buy stuff. One of the biggest albums at the time that relates to the factors that I'm speaking of is the album by The Boys called Messages from the Boys. Even New Edition's first record from the 1980s had a big industry and female following, which helped impact a group that I've mentioned before on this episode, New Kids on the Block. Now, the history behind New Kids on the Block goes all the way back to 1985, when New Edition's original producer Maurice Starr had a fallout with New Edition, so he pretty much wanted to use the same formulas to make a Caucasian version of the group New Edition and decided to call them Nine Nuke, which was a terrible name, so he decided to call them New Kids on the Block. Then a year after development, they ended up recording and releasing their first record, self-titled New Kids on the Block, and the album actually got a lot of success at the time, hitting number 17 on the Canadian music charts, number 31 on the European music charts, and number 25 on the US Billboard charts. Going head to head with New Edition's 1985 release self-titled New Edition, with big hits such as Telephone Man,
Mr. Telephone Man, there's something wrong with my life. When I dial my baby's number, I get a click every time.
Cool It Now,
Really about this time I'm gonna make it on my own. So why don't you fellas just leave me alone? Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, and Mike. If I love the girl, who cares who you like? Cool it now. You got to cool it now. Watch out, you're gonna lose control.
and My Secret.
Secret, see if you can get the heart into the problem and the
Going number 55 on the Canadian music charts, number 1 on the Irish music charts, number 15 on the New Zealand music charts, number 6 on the US Billboard charts, and number 1 on the US R&B music charts. Man, record companies were eating it all up, and more merchandise was made. Now, as soon as the 80s started to come into a big close, New Edition and New Kids on the Block of course still had something to say, but the boys still had something to prove. In 1990, they released their second record, self-titled The Boys, which happened to reach a lot of success, hitting 108 on the US Billboard charts and hitting number 24 on the US Billboard R&B charts, with biggest hits such as Crazy,
You got me going crazy, crazy, crazy.
and Got to Be There, which happened to be a Michael Jackson cover. The boys rode off of that success for a while, but it was a matter of time until they fell off, because since the early 90s were coming around, suits were going out of fashion, and New Jack and hip hop was getting a lot stronger at the time. The boys released their very last record called The Saga Continues, and pretty much, it failed. No, like really, it failed really bad. It failed charting anywhere, and it failed by listeners. No one bought the record, it failed. So now we're heading towards the early 90s. Now, the early 90s was a big part of the New Jack and hip hop movement, thanks to Belle Biv DeVoe. But this was also a time for more kids to come into the music industry. Young child musicians that were making noise in the 90s was Another Bad Creation, Kriss Kross, The Youngsters, Immature, Illegal, and Shaheem, aka The Rugged Child. Now, between 1991 and 1992, the biggest groups to ever go along with the New Jack swing style was Another Bad Creation and Immature, with Another Bad Creation releasing their first record called Coolin' at the Playground, released in 1991, released under Biv 10 Records and Motown Records. They were known as the younger version of Belle Biv DeVoe, with one of their biggest songs, which was a kid version of Poison called Aisha. The album going number 7 on the Billboard 200 and number 2 on the US R&B album charts. Another group in particular who decided to take on the New Jack sound was a group in particular called Immature, releasing their first record in 1992 by the name of On Our Worst Behavior, with biggest hits such as Tear It Up, which was featured on the Baby Kid soundtrack,
Don't be certain of this. It's being evident. We're just having fun.
and The Munchies. Now in 1992, after Another Bad Creation had released their first record in 1991 called Coolin' at the Playground, Kriss Kross had released their debut record called Totally Crossed Out. And on their biggest song called Jump, they dissed Another Bad Creation, calling them another bad little fad, implying that they probably wouldn't last long in the music industry.
Don't try to compare us to another bad little fad. I'm the Mac and I'm bad, give you something that you never had.
So Another Bad Creation found out about the diss, went straight back into the studio in 1992, and made their diss track towards Kriss Kross called Wannabes.
Cause we all that. Somebody's trying to rhyme and trying to look just like us. Somebody's trying to rhyme and trying to look just like us. Tic tac toe, Kriss Kross, come out the box. I have a double jumping out your jocks like a wristwatch. I write two rhymes non-stop. Pop, pop, pop.
Even though I thought the diss track was pretty cool, people thought that Kriss Kross still won the fight. Dissing other young acts was also part of the butterfly effect. And another group in particular that did not like Kriss Kross was the Youngsters. The Youngsters was one of the biggest groups in the roughneck hip-hop era, considering the fact that they were brought up by Naughty by Nature. But since Kriss Kross was one of the biggest groups in the early 90s, the Youngsters started dissing Kriss Kross off of their first record called Something for the Youngsters. And they basically dissed Kriss Kross saying how they don't write their own rhymes, which was true, because Jermaine Dupri wrote everything. So Kriss Kross replied back in 1993 off of one of their biggest songs called Alright.
I ain't come out whack, I came out right. Unlike those moles that chose to pass the mic. It's the Daddy Mac, Big Bang. Everything is real, but you wanna diss cause a sold a couple mil. You can't say nothing if you're last in the line. So when you diss it, just let me know I'm on your mind and it's alright.
During that same time in 1993, the Youngsters had released their second album called Aftermath, with biggest hits such as Is You With Me?
Like that. I strap one thing, plus my crew got my back. Wait a minute, what's up with them kids getting me down? Let's take them in the alley and before they cash flow. Okay, but when should we do it? Right now, so get down.
And Cruise Pop.
The bull shot, hit you with the full shot. Will your cops hurt when we pull props? Who's hot? Bring what's hip hop. I'll say, hey, the flowing ho, hooray, cause we can get done. Here's another from the Youngsters, the mother number funky thugs, straight from Philly Funksters.
Even though the Youngsters were getting success, people were still waiting for a response. But in 1994, instead of giving a new response, they actually released a single called Hip Hop Ride.
See your Cypress on the good or real, cause I'm keeping it righteous. Come on, let me take you on a hip hop ride. Move side to side, let your body glide. Slide.
The Youngsters were reaching a lot of success at its highest peak, but their reputation started to drown out. But they weren't the only ones who wanted the piece of the Kriss Kross. A group in particular who was signed to a LA Reid and Dallas Austin record label called Rowdy Records was a young group called Illegal. Now Illegal at the time was founded in 1992 and released their first record in 1993 called The Untold Truth. Their biggest single off that record was a song called Head or Gut.
Wanna talk shit, but it's a clip. That goes up in the not a double lip, bitch. So if you really wanna throw, nigga, go for bed. I got a new tune, nigga, but boom, now you out of here.
Malik will break the lawnmower and Chris will break the grass. That's his AMCs, cause why APC whip illegal cuts that ass. The way that I approach you and think I was a kid G. That's why I took the time.
It was 119 on the music Billboard charts and on the R&B and hip hop top 200 at number 19. Then Kriss Kross replied back with their diss track towards Illegal called I'm Real.
Like Cypress Hill, son. I freak the funk freaks me and I get ill. Come Thinking to get what these, all you get is these.
But sadly, that was actually Illegal's first and last album to ever be released. Did I forget to mention that that group was pretty much short-lived? As soon as those little beefs started to come to an end, in 1994 there was a brand new artist coming into the centerfold of the music industry, who was actually the youngest member of the Wu-Tang Clan, and his name is Shaheem, aka the Rugged Child. Now he was discovered in 1993 by his Wu-Tang Clan family, and of course his blood family, which was of course Ghostface Killer. And in between the age of 13 and 14, he started recording his record called Shaheem, aka the Rugged Child, which soon became big on the hip-hop charts. But the biggest hit that opened doors for him was On and On.
Would that last before the cops be a minute ass? But honey dip don't wanna listen, cause she's in a position that nobody gives a pot to piss in. Her life is stuck and filled with bad luck, so she fucks and fucks to earn another buck.
New Jack was starting to become a thing of the past, and Roughneck was starting to become a thing of the future. But R&B was still doing its thing at the time, even though New Jack was starting to fade away, including that same year in 1994 when Immature released their second album called Playtime Is Over, which featured a lot more mature love ballads such as Never Lie,
Come back to me, 'cause I feel like you only once in a lifetime.
and Constantly.
Every way and every single day, you always on my mind.
Even then, around that time in the 90s, Shaheem aka The Rugged Child even collaborated with Immature, called Lover's Groove Remix, released in 1996. So let's move a little down the line here. In the 21st century, kid acts were still prominent in the music industry as far as we knew it. Groups in particular such as the OMG Girls, Mindless Behavior, and Jacob Lattimore were ruling the world for sure. Certain dynamics changed in the music industry, especially since there was social media booming at the time, and that similar formula was used throughout the years for all so many acts that came into the industry that happened to be young kids. But while the 20th century was more diverse, the 21st century, most of every act was just all pop. Don't get me wrong, you had little pieces and bits of diversity over here and there, but the basis of all of their music went all the way straight back to pop. But my point of this video is that kids mixed with the music industry makes the music industry very unique. It's a big look that a lot of people have profited on for years, and it definitely shows how diverse the business is. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you guys learned something, and please subscribe, like, favorite, and go ahead and share this video to everybody that you know. Have a great rest of your day, and peace to all of you.